I'm Justin Glaw, writer and journalist, and I've spent my career chronicling the violence, unrest, and chaos of American life. On this podcast, I'll discuss the events roiling this complex and troubling country and speak with some of the people trying to make sense of the madness that pervades our world. This is American Doom. All right, Brian, a little bit of a role reversal here where I'm interviewing you, but let's go back and forth. We can interview each other here. But first off, it's really good to see that you're safe. I'm happy to hear that it sounds like your house is intact. That's obviously not the case for a lot of other people out there. There's a lot of stuff I want to get to, but let's just start with kind of, we've all seen the photos, we've all seen the video, but nothing compares to really being on the ground in this. So can you give us a sense of what it looks like, what it feels like there, and what this whole process has been like for you and for everybody else in the LA area?
Yeah, I mean, it's catastrophic. I have nothing to compare this to in my lifetime. I live in West Hollywood, and so I kind of obviously we all understand there are wildfires that plague California every single year, but I have had a sense of just complete security in the area that I live in because it's so dense. I mean, Hollywood, West Hollywood is the heart of Los Angeles. It is so densely populated. It is so urban that even as you see these wildfires ravage other parts of California, it's just not something that you would ever anticipate could impact you in a spot like this. I mean, this is, there's hardly any vegetation. It's just mostly
Right.
houses and streets and parking lots, really. And so the moment that I looked out my window a couple of days ago and saw Runyon Canyon is a really iconic hiking trail in LA. It's also, again, like right in the heart of LA. Bordering Runyon on both sides is Hollywood. West Hollywood on the west side is leading into Beverly Hills. On the other side of the hill is Studio City and Burbank. So the Hollywood Hills, I mean, Runyon Canyon is really the dead center of LA. And to see Runyon Canyon on fire, and not just that, but that fire moving downhill quickly, you just it I really don't even know how to describe it. I mean, I was at a friend's house because we had no power, and so just wanted to be able to at least charge up my phone and my laptop, and we ran home, and you just start packing whatever, you have to tell yourself that put things in a bag that you would be okay having if you lost everything else.
Yeah.
And all the things that you think you care about, every inch of your house that you've tried to, piece of furniture and little thing here and there, like nothing matters. And I had a backpack, and in the backpack, I had my passport, my social security card, a watch that my dad gave me, my laptop, and my phone, and that's it. That's all I took, and you just I put it right next to the door and went outside, and a bunch of my neighbors were hosing down their roofs in hopes that if an errant ember came onto their houses,
Hmm.
that it wouldn't catch fire. I mean, you see, a lot of these images with entire neighborhoods burned down, but then like a couple of houses standing, and so you just do what you can to try and salvage what you can. And I just was glued to the news. I had a lot of, luckily I have a good friend who is anchoring the local news, and I asked him if he could let me know if that fire jumped from Runyon Canyon, which is again that hiking trail, onto the streets. And the streets here, I'm sure everybody's heard of them. There's Hollywood Boulevard, Sunset Boulevard.
Right.
As you go south, it's Hollywood, it's Sunset, it's Santa Monica Boulevard, it's Melrose, and so you know. Beverly Boulevard, and so if the fire jumped onto those streets, then that would pretty much be effectively the end of Hollywood and West Hollywood in LA. And so I was just, keeping on top of whether that would happen, and just had basically one foot out the door, ready to go. So luckily, I mean, we were spared. I have friends, I have acquaintances, I have friends of friends who woke up, Wednesday morning, Thursday morning, Friday morning, and their houses just aren't there anymore. And it's hard to fathom it's hard to fathom what it feels like for these people to see just their entire life reduced literally to rubble, and it's so crushing to see, and to see it so close up. Obviously, we hear about these tragedies that happen, the hurricanes that constantly hit New Orleans. We hear about the tornadoes that ravage the Midwest. But to see it right here in this city, and even now still, just to be here as plumes of smoke have filled the air, and every single day there's just ash raining down from the sky, really does acutely put it into perspective, the scale and scope of the devastation that we're living through. And again, I consider myself obviously beyond lucky to still have a house that's standing. I don't really know where people even begin to recover from what's happening in LA right now.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, you say that it's hard to describe what's happening because there's really no comparison. There's nothing to
Yeah.
compare it to. And I mean, I think that feeling of like, oh my gosh, this is happening in the city. I know you talked with some fire officials there, like are we getting to the point where we're possibly beginning to understand like how it is that this has now gotten into the city? Because historically, I guess it really hasn't been in some of the areas at least that are being burned to the ground essentially. So like, are we getting to the point where like we can at least a little bit understand how it is that it, I guess, got into a place like Runyon Canyon or got into some of the more urban areas that you and a lot of other people have sort of typically thought of as like, well, it's never going to come here. Like it may be in the mountains outside of the city, but it'll never be in these areas. Do we know why or how that has happened?
We don't know why yet. We don't know, for example, if they were started because of arson. We don't know, for example, if they were just started by virtue of the terrible weather conditions that we're contending with right now. Remember, there are Santa Ana winds that hit LA, and those winds are hurricane force winds. We're talking 80 to 100-mile-per-hour winds. We
Yeah.
also haven't had rain in the better part of a year. I actually I don't want to speak um, with too much certainty because there might have been a day, but I can't actually remember a day in the last year, a day in 2024 where it rained in Los Angeles. And so the conditions are already just terrible unto themselves. And if a fire sparks anywhere, these embers, because of that wind, because of these hurricane force winds, these embers can spread miles away. And obviously when wherever they fall, if there's enough dry brush, if there's just enough, dry anything, vegetation,
Dry shingles on someone's home.
of course. And a lot of these places that are being hit, are, these are not homes that were built in the last 5 or 10 years. People have lived here for decades and decades and decades. And you talk about the Pacific Palisades, which is obviously the home to one of the two major fires where really tens of thousands of acres have burned up. That's at the foot of the Santa Monica Hills. And so the location here is especially conducive to having these fires, not just in the brush out, in more of a rural landscape, but to allow it to come here to LA. But to your point, I've spoken to the state fire marshal, and we don't have any indication now as to what caused stuff. Fox LA reported in the last day or so that there was a citizen's arrest for somebody out in the West Hills fire who was suspected of committing arson. They ultimately didn't have enough probable cause to hold him for arson, but he is being held regardless for another reason. I think he had some other issue that allowed him to be arrested. So we'll keep an eye on that. Obviously, if there is anybody exploiting this tragedy to commit further crimes, obviously, you hope that those people are caught and held accountable to the fullest extent of the law. But right now, it's not so many answers and a lot of questions.
But do we have some answers as far as, we may not know the exact genesis of this thing, but like, do we know, can we at least put down some of the misinformation and some of the speculation that has, come from right-wing media about, well, this thing got out of hand because of fire hydrants that didn't work, or Governor Newsom's water policies, or the Delta base smelt fish.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, is there any truth to any of that stuff based off of your understanding of what the response to the fire has been look like and your conversations with fire officials?
Based on my conversations and also everything that I've read thus far, and I've obviously been keeping on top of this as best I could, there isn't any truth to any of the things that Donald Trump is saying. Like this idea that Gavin Newsom, all he has to do is open up some spigot from Northern
Yeah.
California to Southern California, that doesn't exist. Or this idea that he prioritized smelt over having water to Southern California, also a completely unrelated issue, has no bearing on what we're dealing with here in Southern California. This idea that there is no water. It's true that there wasn't enough water pressure in a lot of the hydrants to get water to the places that it needed to go, but that's just again a testament to the
How
scale
big
and
this
scope.
fire
Right.
was.
I mean,
Yeah.
we are talking tens of thousands of acres, and really the systems that are in place right now are not built to be able to deal with a fire that's this size. And remember, it's not just one fire that the LAPD and neighboring communities are dealing with, and Cal Fire more broadly.
Yeah.
We have the Palisades fire, we have the Eaton fire. For a little bit, we had the Sunset fire. We had one in Studio City. We had the Kenneth fire. So they're happening everywhere. I mean, it really is like apocalyptic when you look at the map of where these fires are sprouting up, and because of the conditions that I referred to or alluded to before, they're able to spread so quickly, and and that diverts resources away. I mean, even in the reporting that I've been watching, when the West Hills fire, they're calling that the Kenneth fire, when that sprouted up, they had to pull resources away from the Palisades fire, which again, 20,000 acres have been burned. They had to pull resources away from that one to try and get the Kenneth fire under control so that that one doesn't also turn into a 20,000 acreage fire that we're seeing right now. So this really is just by virtue of the scale of this thing within the LA city limits. I just don't know that any city could be prepared for what we're contending with right now.
Right. Yeah, and as you're talking here and describing the scale and the scope and the speed of all of this, I mean, I couldn't help but think of, a very unfortunate metaphor between the physical fire that is happening and how this information starts off and how quickly it spreads. I mean, when Trump came out, what was it, Tuesday or Wednesday or whatever, and he made that first post, my initial thought was, oh wow, we're not even remotely waiting for a natural disaster to even pass a little bit and get a little bit under control before we're starting to throw around political
Right.
gamesmanship and blaming. We're just going right into it, right? Like,
Yeah.
and by we, I mean Trump and Republicans. They're not going to wait anymore, right? And of course, like him putting that out there, oh, it's Newsom's fault because of the sort of insane things that you just described, like that is now in the information bloodstream and it is out there and it has spread everywhere well before anybody like you or me or anybody else in the press can fact check it. It's already too late. Like the fire is already alive and spreading by the time that people like you and others have start saying like, no, actually none of this is true. It has to do with the strengths of the fire. So like, I don't know. I don't really have a question here other than to
No,
just sort of point this out. It's just
and look,
crazy.
I think it's worth noting that these guys know what they're doing. They know what they're doing by virtue of promulgating misinformation and disinformation. This is a way for them to perpetuate their narrative because they view California as a punching bag. They view Gavin Newsom as a political rival, somebody who has stature in the Democratic Party. And so it's never been about helping people who need help in a tragedy. Just like for a lot of these Republicans, it's not about helping Americans who need help. This is about furthering their agenda. And for them, they see this as a way to punch down on a state that votes for Democrats, on a city that is basically the liberal bastion of the United States. And so, gun to their heads, if you really ask these people, do you think that California isn't able to contend with these fires because of the Delta smelt? I think they would probably be able to tell you the truth, but because they know that a lot of right-wing media exists in this hermetically sealed bubble, they can get away with saying whatever they want, and their audience, this is the sad part, their audience will be none the wiser because they're not going to watch the other side. They're
Right.
not going to be able to consume the content that actually gives them good information. And this is something that I've said before, and I'll say it now, which is that Republicans will frame um, Democrats as the enemy here, but in reality, the people who Republicans have the most contempt for is their own audience, that they would feed them this kind of bullshit on a constant basis, even when really the only people who walk out of this misinformed or underinformed are those very people.
Hmm.
They would actually derive the most benefit from not consuming media from the people that they're trusting right now, because those are the people that are just giving them the worst information. Those are the people that are going to be walking around in the aftermath of all of this, thinking that DEI is some reason that that a wildfire that exploded because of the Santa Ana winds raging at 100 miles an hour, and in an environment where there hasn't been rain in the better part of a year, where those fires exploded, and those people are going to be none the wiser. They're not going to understand that the conditions that we have in California, all of which, by the way, are exacerbated by climate change, but nobody on the right
Right.
wants to talk about that. That doesn't exist. They would much rather talk about, oh, well, the reason that these fires exploded is because this woman who leads LA Fire, the LA, city fire chief, whatever it is, sleeps with a woman. Like, give
Right.
me a break.
Right. Yeah. So two things that I want to get to the climate crisis aspect of this, but I just wanted to point out also that when you're talking about the base, like consuming the misinformation, in my mind, like this whole misinformation about this blame game about who's responsible for the bad response to the fire, right? Like that is like a perfect encapsulation of what the Republican Party has done really for my entire lifetime, which is feed its base a bunch of culture war, grievance, red meat stuff that has nothing really to do with their individual lives, and has nothing to do with making their lives better, and making sure that they have a good job, and all of the things that they say they now do as this working class party. This is just the perfect encapsulation of that culture war grievance stuff, like, oh, hey guys, look over there. California, that liberal hellhole, is on fire, and it's because they have a lesbian fire chief, and they're a bunch of environmental hippies that want to protect a fish instead. Like it is like the perfect, almost cartoonish scenario for Republicans to feed that culture war stuff to their base. But I think also we can't discount how much of this is blaming literally anything other than the climate crisis, right?
Right.
And I wonder, like, I know it's impossible to try to suss this out, but how much of this is the culture war grievance blame game stuff, and like you said, going after what will probably be a pretty powerful Democratic rival in Gavin Newsom, compared to, like, let's just talk about anything other than climate change. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I think, look, you're not going to hear the word climate change unless it's uttered on right wing media in a way that's disparaging to the whole to the whole concept. I think that that's not going to be politically advantageous for them, and so we're never going to acknowledge that as long as Republicans are in charge. Look, the reality is that ship, I think, has largely sailed, and so even though we are seeing these thousand-year storms happen multiple times every single year for the over the last decade. I mean, I was sitting in my childhood home in New Jersey when Hurricane Sandy hit. If you ask a kid from New Jersey how many hurricanes batter that state, it's not many. Like we had no schema for anything like that, and that seemed completely like some freak accident, right? Like some freak phenomenon. And now it's not. Like now the thought of if you say that a city like New York, like Manhattan, lower Manhattan would be underwater, that I don't think anybody that's listening to this right now would think twice about the prospect of that actually happening. The same thing for Hollywood, California now to be possibly on fire. When we see these thousand-year storms popping up every single year now, and we have all of the evidence that we could possibly need that there is a major problem afoot, that there is a serious issue that we're contending with right now. I don't know what more you would need than visuals of West Hollywood nearly on fire, of Lower Manhattan underwater, of droughts ravaging the Midwest, of hurricanes battering the Southeast over and over and over to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars. I don't know what more we can do to prove that this is real and that it's a hell of a lot more expensive to ignore it than it is to actually take it seriously. But at this point, anybody who continues to deny the legitimacy and existence and danger of climate change, I think that that ship has sailed. I don't know what you can do to get them back after seeing all of this stuff and still not being able to get through to them. And that really does go to show the potency of the hyper politicized environment that we live in right now. And the sad part of all of that, the saddest part of all of that is that the people in the Republican Party who know better, who have all
Yeah.
the information in front of them, have opted instead to defer to their donors in big oil and big gas, who have a vested interest in preserving the status quo and line their coffers with hundreds of thousands of dollars in donation money so that these people will continue to do nothing. And also just the state of our politics more broadly. And so when you have Democrats who say that it's important to combat climate change, that unto itself is enough for a lot of these Republicans to say, let's not. Just because the other side said let's do it, we should say let's not, because everything has to be a fight, even if it's regarding our own existence, the
Right.
our own planet, our own like ability to preserve humanity in the United
Right.
States. And so that's just, I think all of those things together really make for, no pun intended, but a perfect storm that we're contending with right now.
Right, like there's a sort of an absurd cartoon version of this where like Republicans are the last people standing on an island where there's nothing left in the entire world and they're just happy as hell that they've owned the libs, right? Who
Totally.
were so this okay, last question here is like when it comes to combating like I go back to Hurricanes Hilton or Milton and Helene, where it was like, oh no, like let's not talk about climate change. Let's blame like, oh, this happened because Democrats didn't care about these red areas. Obviously, you and I have discussed like, well, that somehow doesn't apply to California here, so like they have to come up with something else. But
Yeah.
like, how do you combat when on day one of a natural disaster, like the manifesto coming down from the top of the Republican Party is let's spin all of this stuff to be about progressive liberal policies and democratic elected officials. Like how do we as a media and as a society combat like that powerful of misinformation that is then getting sucked up by there are millions of Americans who right now will go to their graves thinking that these LA wildfires were the fault of a lesbian fire chief in
100%.
Los Angeles.
100%. Yeah.
And that's because I believe that gets into the information bloodstream. And by the time you and I or anybody else fact checks it, it's already too late. So, like, do those fact checks even matter? Like, how do you combat all of this?
It's exactly the right question, and I think the answer is just to be as knowing full well, like, it's hard because I couldn't even log on, right, in on Tuesday and Wednesday because I was trying to make sure that my house would still be standing, and so a lot of the people that are in an environment where they can speak with some authority about what's happening are dealing with the thing that they need to be dealing with, and they that creates a situation where they cede that ground to folks who are not here and who are looking to exploit the situation for their own partisan benefit. And so I think the answer here is that you just have to, as far as the media is concerned, you have to move quickly, knowing that even all the way up to the president elect of the United States, Donald Trump, wasted no time in attacking Gavin Newsom and attacking his political rivals. And so that's the media environment that we're in. And we have to disabuse ourselves of the notion that Republicans are ever going to give us grace, ever going to give us room, ever going to wait until the facts on the ground are
Right.
actually validated. And so we just have to move quickly. We have to be everywhere, and we have to repeat this stuff over and over and over, because to your exact point, they'll be posting every 30 seconds to make sure that their lies, that their political narrative gets into the political bloodstream. And then
Right.
once that's there, it's hard to shake it. I mean, my God, how many times have we heard the word smelt in the last 3 days? Because that's what Donald Trump is pushing. And so it's incumbent on us. And look, we're not always going to be in a situation, or at least I can speak for myself, I'm not going to be in a situation where I have to reconcile reporting on this stuff and also making sure that my home is standing. But I do think that it's incumbent on us to recognize that this is the speed that the political environment, media environment operates with right now. And so we have to know that it's incumbent on us to be there immediately and inject as much accurate information into the media, ecosystem as we possibly can.
Right.
And that's all we can do. Just try to fight back I mean, there is, like, to your earlier point, there are a lot of uh, uh similar. This is the perfect metaphor for the fire that we're contending with right now, but you just try to battle back against it to the extent that you can with all the tools that you have available to you, and try to reach as many people as possible. Also, I think something that at least the left is understanding more and more is that it's important to get on as many platforms as possible. We can't just rely on the small presence, and I say small because relative to what the right has, and relative to digital media, new media more broadly, what we have in left of center political media is small. And so we have to be willing to go outside the confines of our own little political universe and actually try to reach people where they are. And that's going to be, everywhere from politics adjacent to not political at all, go on culture, go
Yeah.
on regular TV. I mean, like, wherever it is that people consume their media, I think Democrats also have to get better at reaching people everywhere they are, and not ceding that ground to Republicans who are willing to go to places that Democrats might feel uncomfortable finding themselves in.
Right. Okay. So when are you going on Joe Rogan's podcast then to talk about all of
Look,
this with him?
whenever he'll have me, I will. And I've been trying to get on as
I
many.
know you've been going on. I've seen
Piers
you on
Morgan.
Piers Morgan's thing, right? So
Morgan. I've been speaking with Chris Cuomo on News Nation. That's a center right
yeah,
leaning audience, and so anywhere that I can go that I think will get us out of the bubble that we find ourselves in, I think is going to be helpful. Especially in this environment right now.
right, right. Strange and disturbing metaphors for sure between
Yeah.
the actual physical fire and the sort of fire of information warfare that defines our current political era. So anyway, Brian Tyler Cohen, thank you so much for joining me. Glad to hear you're all right. Glad to hear your house is still standing, and stay safe. And thanks for the time.
Justin, thanks so much for the work you do and for spotlighting this today.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you for listening to American Doom. This podcast is just a part of my work as a writer and journalist. To keep up, or at least to try to, because chaos and speed are the two primary drivers of my work, you can subscribe to my newsletter on Substack. Just search for American Doom there, and you'll find the investigations and stories that I cover. Coming up on my newsletter are more dives into election deniers working as local election officials across the country. This is work I've been doing mostly by myself for the last 4 years, and it's not possible without your support. American Doom is the only place that you'll find reporting on local election denier officials. So if you support this effort to protect against threats to democracy, please subscribe to my newsletter, American Doom, on Substack. Thank you.